Hello and welcome to this month's monthly news review from DCD. I'm Emma Strutton, I'm head of channels at DCD, and in this monthly session, we'll be looking back at some of the key themes and biggest news stories that we've seen at DCD over June. So, with me here today, I have Seb Moss, who's the group publisher of InfoX and executive editor at DCD. So, thanks for joining me, Seb. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. As people know who have been following British politics, it is boiling hot. So if you see us sweating on camera, we're just excited to talk about data centers.
Yeah, exactly. And Ben Wadecki, who's the senior editor of STX Central. So thanks for joining me today, Ben.
Thank you. Thriving, surviving, and couldn't think of a third thing to rhyme.
Perfect, great. So to kick us off, obviously we've had a very big month for news stories, lots going on, new chips, data center moratoriums. So just looking back at the sort of biggest headlines of the last month, maybe Seb, if I can start with you, what have you been hearing? What have you been seeing? What have you been writing about?
So it's a tough question because I was going through the numbers and we wrote 700 news stories this past month. So, it's like picking a favorite child, but you have 700 children. You're never going to get it right. But, you mentioned new chips. I think that's a huge one, is Jalapeno, the new chip from OpenAI and Broadcom. So what's interesting there is there's been a lot of, consternation. Will they actually get this chip out? OpenAI is a little bit of a flaky. They changed their direction a lot. But so a few years ago, we broke the story that Richard Ho had moved over. He was one of the fathers of the Google TPU, which is really clearly an inspiration for Jalapeno. But what they pitched this as is ground up, right? The inference they're saying is, look, GPUs were originally gaming chips, and then they've slowly morphed into these AI chips. But if you start with a clean slate, you sprinkle some AI to help you develop this thing, what can you make? That's theoretically the thing, but we're not going to see any real statistics, any details about the chip until another month or so. But it should be coming out this year, specifically for inference workloads, specifically just for OpenAI. But at the same time, we broke the scoop that they're hiring for a separate team to work with semiconductor companies and use their AI tools to make those semiconductor companies more advanced. And if you look at the contract details that they talk about in the job listing, they want, maybe the deal isn't that those companies pay them in cash, but they might pay them in kind with chips. So OpenAI are really trying to use their current market dominance to kind of snowball effect and get the chips that keep them in the lead, which is getting tougher and tougher for them as Anthropic catches up.
Yeah. And I suppose, what do you think that kind of that OpenAI has released this is kind of indicative of anything that's going on in the market at the moment, that they've kind of decided to release their own chip, which is going to be which is kind of expected kind of by the end of 2026. Is there anything that you think that shows about what's going on in the AI world?
You got a couple of threads supporting, right? Is one, Nvidia doesn't hide the fact that they're making a killing off of everybody, that their margin's insane. So if you can make a comparable chip for yourself, you instantly save a lot of costs. And then the other part is, because of the chip shortages, Nvidia is acting as this kingmaker, right? So if a neo cloud wants to use AMD chips, maybe they don't get the GPU ones. Or if Nvidia wants to invest in one of the foundation model companies, and suddenly they get a lot of chips. So the further you can, the more options you can give yourself, the more you can break free of that control. So there's that. Then there's the fact that it's starting to mature as a sector. Generative AI has been around long enough where it makes sense to go, hey, we know how this workload works. We can have a chip that's hyper specific, because the thing with chips is, obviously, the more specific to the task, generally the more efficient, better at that task it can be, but then it can't do much else. So you wait until you really understand the workload. I think I mentioned on a previous one of these, YouTube has its own chip, the Argos chip. All it does is transcode video. Meta has transcoding video chips. So, and they're really good at that, but you're not going to do this stream on it. You're not going to play a game on it. So you get that push pull of wanting flexibility, but also wanting efficiency. And this is proof that the inference era is really entering the efficiency point of the life cycle.
Yeah. Do you think we'll see more and more AI developers kind of trying to build their own chips?
Yeah. We scooped a couple months ago. XAI is hiring for its own chip people. Obviously, Elon Musk has kind of flip-flopped around chips. He had the Dojo team doing D1 and stuff at Tesla. Then they all left, and he fired some of them. And now he's trying to get back in, and he's trying to develop chips. So they're a weird one. Anthropic is heavily believed to be kind of in the early stages of looking, and then you've got that specter of, like I said, the dream is AI itself does a lot of the chip development. Google's with DeepMind, Alpha Chip, doing chip development. It's still early stages to see how real that is, but theoretically, then it brings that timeline down. And then even if your workload is as it is for a year, but you can make that chip really quick, then it's worth it, and you just replace, rather than at the moment these very long chip development cycles mean you don't want to go down this architecture that changes in a few years, and then you've wasted all that money and you've wasted all that infrastructure.
Yeah, great, thanks. And how about you, Ben? What's been going on from the SDX Central side of things?
Yeah, in the wonderful world of networking, I think it's hard to ignore the changing in topologies. So Amazon's brand new resilient graph network, RNG, looks to be the interesting thing the last couple of weeks. If you think about traditional data center networks, the data structure, they're governed by something called a fat tree, which the best way to explain it is an organizational chart you'd have at your company, where the top is connected with thousands of nodes and goes upwards. Now, that's worked for normal data centers, but as Seb just said, it doesn't really work for AI, especially if you've got, packets congesting, things not going in the order that they should be, and that slows down workloads, slows down inference workloads, which, training was one thing, but inference, that's real-time workloads that need to be done straight away. So Amazon came up with this design, which creates a kind of a flat alternative where routers at the bottom directly connect to one another, and it's aimed at maximizing diversity of routes. Now, in an inference workload, that's huge. Getting things faster, getting things through quicker, but it also eliminates the amount of routers that you actually need, which for infrastructure build-outs it is quite big. And when you're dealing at the hyperscale level with millions of GPUs, Rainier, for example, on the AWS side, you've got thousands that need to be interconnected at once. Having that flat topology, less controller, one central controller, diverting packets through the network is a lot simpler. And Amazon aren't doing this alone. OpenAI have been doing this with MRC. We kind of broke that last November unintentionally. We didn't realize what it was when it dropped, but it was part of Microsoft using it for their AI WAN in some of their Fairwater data centers. Now they're actually working with OpenAI, and that will probably be the data structure that powers the Jalapeno chips, the underlying component. And I think what's really interesting is traditional networks are usually 3-tier, but to get away from that extra hop to get things moving quicker, you're going to see a larger number of these 2-tier flat topologies coming through. And it's really technical, but in anything to get AI workloads faster and more efficient, even if it's marginal gains, things like this prove really, really integral in the world of networking.
And I think it's this interesting moment where, to the point of, saying, oh, we're in this AI era is just trite at this point. Everyone knows that. But it's more that we've been in this era long enough that you're starting to see genuine diversity in approaches. When ChatGPT blew up and everything, it was just, oh, let's borrow as much as we can from the world of supercomputers, as much as we can from the world of cloud, shove them together and try and get the best we can get, right? Now it's a couple of generations down, you're starting to see companies try and find very unique ways of doing network architecture, very unique ways of doing chips. To your point on Rainier, AWS's big cluster, that's their chip. It's Trainium 2, right? 500,000 of those, and then with their networking. And then similarly for even just the GPU clusters, where they're just sticking a bunch of NVIDIA chips together, the networking approach is then where they can differentiate, which is why we bought SDX, because we think networking's just going to get more and more complex and more integral to the evolution of data centers.
I mean, it started out a few years ago where everyone was just using InfiniBand because that's what they used in HPC. Now Ethernet is back again, and you've taken the things that made InfiniBand great, sprinkled those through Ethernet, and there's a reason now that an Ethernet-based system taking those best of InfiniBand is the most proliferant supercomputing interconnect in the world right now, because it works, it's efficient, and more importantly, engineers actually know what it is, so they can iterate upon it. It's open, and we're seeing so many interesting and fun designs coming through. Sure, they're highly technical, but like I said, it's about getting packets through faster, more efficiently, and with less routers, less network switches, you can spend more on GPUs, which at the hyperscale level, is sad, but obviously very important to those guys.
Yeah, it's power envelope, right? Like everyone who's watching this knows that every megawatt counts. And if you can get 500 megawatts for a facility, you're golden. But then you don't want to waste that 500 megawatts on a network, on networking infrastructure. You want to have as much free as possible for GPUs or jalapenos or whatever. But the computer is what makes the money. The networking is what keeps it going. So you want that networking to be as optical and as power, not hungry as possible.
Yeah. And Ben, you also released an article at the beginning of June on how on Cisco's new cloud control as well.
Yeah, so Cisco, it's event season, and Cisco kicked it off in early June with their live event, which is arguably one of the big dates in the networking calendar. And it might not seem like a sexy announcement, but cloud control was their big thing. So previously, if you were a Cisco customer, which in the networking world you are, you would have like 7 different logins for Meraki, for Thousand Eyes, WebEx Control Hub. It was a mess. So what they've done is reduced that and brought out cloud control, which is one central pane where folks can log in. They're arguing a sovereignty control in and around that because you have direct central point of control. And that is interesting because it eliminates that sprawl, but then it's also part of Cisco's wider platform play. 10 years ago, they're in the software space and kind of lagging. Today, they are building themselves as the kind of network layer for the AI era, much to Seb's chagrin. I feel like centralizing that into one platform is sensible, and it was one of the bigger things that came out this month, and it's a lot of what there is actually bigger than what happened down the road a week later at HP Discover, which we'll talk about. But I feel like Cisco making that platform play shows that they're maturing in terms of what they're trying to do and attract hyperscale customers who just want one port of call, not 7 different sprawls. But also, you don't have to then sign up to 3 different things if you just want the one. I think that's really important and ties into the kind of central play of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and you mentioned you were sort of mentioning Ethernet earlier. We've also seen kind of news from HPE on that as well.
Yeah, so HP Discover was they've done some updates for some of their storage Slingshot systems, the Slingshot 400. They're trying to create multi-tenancy environments. So the idea is on the supercomputing stage, you can take one big cluster and separate it into multiple environments, and they're building this sovereignty play in which you can everything is secure. So data from one cluster that goes into a central storage system is completely isolated. That's really important, especially if they're selling to government agencies, folks that really need stringent security. Because if you're just having a secure cluster, but then it's going into a central storage system, that's not secure. I can still access that from the central storage system. So that's really important. But I think the big thing from HP Discover was actually the thing that HP probably didn't want to talk about, which was the cost increases. So we've seen that HPE came out with essentially doubling pricing quote validity from 15 days to 30 days. So pricing quote validity is the specific time frame during which a supplier guarantees the stated price and terms of a product or service. Now, in this particular instance, that's really important because we were in a component shortage era. Um, we have the memory shortage, which is ongoing, but then other things that further down the stack in the networking world are really impactful. So optics are becoming a problem, and lasers are a big issue, and we're going to see that proliferate over the next year or so. So for HPE to double that is a bit worrying for suppliers who really need to nail down what they're spending at a very fast pace. These build outs are massively are going at massive scale at a lot of pace. So that was a lot of what people were talking about to us on the ground there. Dan Meyer, our NAM editor, was over there, and I think that's really important that cost is going to dominate no matter what fancy product you put out. And I think component shortages, you guys spoke about it on the last episode, is here to stay, folks, unfortunately.
Seb, do you have any thoughts on that too? So are you nodding a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I want to buy a new PC, and I'm just suffering the same. Right? I want to build one, and I look at the prices, and I look at the shortages, and I'm like, yeah, maybe another few years. I think every single company can see HP's struggle of like it's really hard to build a business plan. It's really hard to build any kind of understanding of your own margins if the market is shifting and changing so much. And to Ben's point, if they start putting that on their suppliers, those suppliers will start putting it on their suppliers. And it does mean that someone's left holding the bag if it swings one way or the other. You saw on the consumer side, right? Apple recently announced that all their products get more expensive because of memory prices. And Micron's CEO was pretty open, saying, we gave Apple and others a chance back when memory was quite cheap and when we weren't doing as well to fix in some prices just a little higher than they were then. And companies passed on it. Apple passed on it. Apple could have paid a little premium then, still had their huge margins that they charge for even the slightest bit more storage. And right now be golden, but people were too short term then, and now they're suffering. And we're seeing that everywhere.
Yeah, on the enterprise side, a great example is Everpure, the folks formerly known as Pure Storage. They've said we've raised our prices by 70% from January to April, and that's in 4 months, and that's lead times obviously extend over 3-4 months anyway, so things could rise further. But they've turned around and said, look, we will shift some of that burden onto ourselves in order to keep customers on board, keep customers happy. We're seeing companies try and come up with these not fun, but interesting ways of trying to stop just applying the cost onto customers, because at the end of the day, those are the guys that are going to suffer in this. And I feel like if we don't start to plan ahead and come up with it in stuff like that, lead times, which are already extending into 2028, are going to become a big problem.
So here's a pivot for you. Everything's getting more expensive. Consumer gear is getting more expensive. It's just one part of why people hate data centers, right? People are increasingly anti-data center. They're the big villain, which is why the other story I want to talk about was Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Sanders both introduced an AI data center moratorium act. Now, before anyone who doesn't follow American politics gets too scared, this act is not passing, right? It's too on the kind of political fringe people of in Ocasio-Cortez AOC's case, they're not the ruling party. In Sanders' case, he's an independent. This is not passing. So the actual stuff in the bill, people shouldn't be too scared about. But it's just a sign of the times. We've started tracking moratoriums at DCD. We've got dozens and dozens of them coming across, small towns, and then when one town passes it, another passes it. And I think the industry needs to understand why. Part of it is incorrect, right? There's a lot of misinformation about water usage, as people know. The AI data centers are more closed loop, don't have to use that much water. Part of it is intentional misinformation. Part of it is just, look, it's a complex industry that if you're not part of, people find boring, so they're going to zone out and they'll get stuff wrong. And then part of it's fair, right? In XAI's case, where they're putting gas turbines near people and not getting the right permission, if I lived near that, I'd be upset. I'd be angry. The industry needs to work out how to position itself against that. It also needs to be prepared for it to get worse. Next presidential election will probably be the first time a presidential candidate has to have a policy in their campaign on data centers, and it's not clear if they're going to be pro or against, or most realistically for a politician, try and split the circle and make no one happy. But it is just going to get tougher. Data centers need to be honest about where they are failing and louder about where they're doing well, and not just roll their eyes and go, well, these people use the internet. Oh, they have an iPhone. That using the internet is a non-negotiable for being a citizen. You can then negotiate what that means in your local neighborhood. So yeah, it's gonna get interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And do you see this as kind of a wide indicative of kind of a wider global trend of data centers becoming more political, or is it more North America focused? Obviously, because it's the data center capital of the world.
Yeah, I mean, America's always going to be bigger because you're going to get those like true gigawatt clusters that you don't see that much elsewhere. You've also got just a more vibrant community of NIMBY types than some places. But here in the UK, you're seeing it. I think we're in a different position where the country's not doing great, so people, in most cases, just take any investment they can get. But you are seeing it around the world. We're seeing it across Asia. We're seeing it across Europe. The difference is, especially in Europe, we already had a lot of the slow regulatory data center operators are used to it taking forever to get a project through because some butterfly or something, the classic. Whereas in America, they were used to, you grease the wheels, they move. You saw Kevin O'Leary, he tried to blame the anti-data center movement on Chinese instigators and on Fox News. And Fox News, not known for fact checking that often, had to fact check and do an apology on it and say, look, we've got no proof that these local protesters are secretly backed by the Chinese Communist Party. And so you've got to put it in two buckets, right? There's the local opposition, which is misinformation about water, genuine concern about, hey, this area, this field, or whatever, maybe my kids used to play on this field and now it's a data center, air quality. And then you've got the broader stuff, which is, it really doesn't help that all the big AI guys are getting on stage and going, this is going to take your job, like a reverse Oprah, and just making everyone scared about the future. And then you can't protest an algorithm, you can't stop an algorithm being built, but where that algorithm lives, I can hold a placard in front of that. So data centers are the physical manifestation of the AI wave that's increasingly going to scare people. That's only going to get stronger. And again, it's on data centers to try and decouple themselves from that as best they can and go, hey, we're curing these diseases, we're keeping this service online, we're doing this. Even in this moratorium bill, it struggles, right? It struggles to define what an AI data center is. It says more than 20 megawatts, more than 20 kilowatt rack, liquid cooled. If it actually passed, the industry could pivot and find data center architectures that get around that. There are perfectly good non-AI data centers that are high density, simulation, healthcare stuff that would be caught up on it. It's incredibly hard. Back in the Obama era of my career, that's how long I've been writing about data centers. They were trying to do a data center modernization act, right, for the US government. They said, we have all these server closets, data centers, colo facilities that we're doing various government work on, sprawling, that massively underutilized. Let's modernize them. Let's turn them into fewer, bigger data centers. And the amount of stories I had to write about the government's fight over what the definition of a data center is. You had the GAO saying it's one thing. You had the government, the White House saying it's another thing. It's like, what is a data center? What are we modernizing? If, where you and Ben are in the office right now, you go upstairs, there's a room with a rack in it, right? That's our little server room where we do some networking. That's not a data center, right? We're not a data center company, but by one definition of the US government, that would count as a data center. By another definition, it doesn't. So it's really hard to ban something that we don't even know how to define.
I just worry when the folks at the forefront of this are Jeff Bezos saying that humans' water consumption is limiting AI's potential. I feel like the data center industry needs some kind of spokesperson that isn't billionaires with a financial responsibility to their shareholders. It's frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the big theories of why Sam Altman and others talk about the destructive nature of AI is to make it sound more powerful than it is, and therefore, hey, I want a piece of that. I want to invest in this thing. If someone's building the Manhattan Project, I'd rather have 5% of the Manhattan Project than no percent of the Manhattan Project, and that works from winning over investors, but it doesn't work from winning over people. This moratorium bill, you look at the wording of the bill, they just quote the guys. They quote Elon Musk. They quote Jeff Bezos. They quote Dario, because they say Bond villainy stuff that really helps resonate with people to galvanize them against a sector that does do a lot of good, does do a lot of everything, because it's infrastructure, right? Infrastructure does good, bad, everything. But it doesn't help when, the biggest spokespeople are, $1 billion type people.
And then wasn't Colossus designated technically a weapon under the so-called Department of War just to get around that?
Yeah. So, theories on Elon Musk's ongoing influence in the US government and his healthy contributions to the political process aside. So XAI, now part of SpaceX, now named SpaceX AI, has repeatedly deployed way more gas turbines than they are permitted. They dispute some of the narrative of how, but realistically, they sometimes say there's X many gas turbines, and then people fly a plane over with a thermal camera, and it turns out there's more. you had the NAACP and others try and sue them and say, look, you can't be polluting the local neighborhood. The DOJ have weighed in and said, we think you should drop this case. Still ongoing, but that's the push to say drop it, because Grok is used in the Iran not at war. And that, again, that opens a door to, if a data center if you can just break every rule but get it live and then get a military contract in there, then everything you've done is fine, apparently. So that, again, really is not going to make people like data centers. I do think XAI is one of the worst actors. Most people in the sector are a lot more careful when it comes to air pollution and getting permits. But it's the nature of people's attention. People are not following a digital realty data center. They're not following some non-consumer brand they've never heard of. Whereas Elon Musk gets headlines, people know who he is. So you see Elon Musk data center does bad thing, people assume it's every data center.
Yeah, thanks, Seb. I'd like to move us forward a bit to discuss some of the big releases that we've had over the last month. So Ben, you released the storage supplement on SDX. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that. How's AI impacting storage? What were the biggest articles? Who did you speak to for this?
Yeah, I mean, what a pivot! But storage has never been sexy. It's really hard in the trifecta of computing to talk about storage because compute gets the limelight. Networking is kind of the newer, cooler brother coming out of late. Storage has always just been that thing. You have to have storage. It's never been the cool guy, but right now it's hot, and that's because of AI. We're talking about AI way too much, but the integral part of this is that you didn't really think about storage beforehand, and right now, the amount of information that AI is not just ingesting but generating as well. You need a place not only to keep that, but to be able to retrieve it. Again, tying into the network component, it has to be the central reservation of this entire build out, and managing that with latency and then compressing the actual weights of the models themselves requires some real intricacies. And so that is the 411 of what's going on here. So we created one of our bi-quarterly reports on this, and it's AI centric, right? So we talk a lot about how AI is kind of impacting KV cache value. So that's in the actual, that's where models go, an AI system will repeat what it already knows rather than having to get external information. Um, then there's also things like TurboQuant, which was arguably one of the bigger things coming out of late, whereby it's a compression algorithm. All there is an algorithm that compresses the weight of a model, so that way the model is smaller, it can run faster, it needs less information of what it's running. And it was like that dress from a few years ago viral on nerd Twitter, right? Matthew Prince, the CEO of Cloudflare, called it the next DeepSeek. It caused that level of hysteria. So we went through it and found, yeah, sure, it can reduce the weight of a model dramatically, which frees up the amount of storage you need to run a model, which improves overall performance. The other thing we're seeing is obviously the neocloud perspective as well. The way they're using their networks and storage components, they're using a lot fewer more sizable data sets, and they're moving them in short, sustained bursts across persistent endpoints. So that requires a kind of a different approach to storage because you need specific bandwidth thing to get that to go. But then there's the other component as well, whereby what do you do when it's in storage? Because it's there. You need it for the AI, you need it to access it easier, you need to move it around. So we're seeing a lot of storage vendors, pure play storage vendors, moving into this world of, Everpure, Pure Storage calls it data primacy, data architecture, whereby it's creating this extra layer in which an AI system will be able to sift through disparate structured and unstructured data sources across storage levels and pick out information it needs faster, more efficiently. We're seeing storage vendors now come up against folks like Databricks, which you wouldn't have thought of a few years ago, but ultimately it means that storage vendors are now sexy. They're up there, and I think it's really integral. So we did a lot of stuff and research going into this, and I think one of the bigger things is AMD buying Mext, which is a storage software startup. A lot of chip vendors are buying all sorts of things right now, but to buy a storage software startup is not as interesting. But actually, when you look at it for what we're talking about around storage and memory optimization, it's about improving workloads, especially for AMD GPUs, and their Open Rocky system, which is important. With spiraling DRAM costs, you get the best out of what you already have is the most important thing. So that's a big thing that we're seeing. Um, so that was actually a really, really integral move. And you know, again, you're not buying Marvell, you're not buying anyone really interesting. You're buying a software storage company. It's weird, right? Another couple of things that we're seeing is around obviously alternative approaches to memory. So DRAM, HBM has been the leader for years in GPUs and just general performance, intensive workloads. But actually, the rise of SRAM, alternative memory solutions, are powering storage and powering AI workloads. So Cerebrus, they're SRAM based, but then also that their approach to SRAM computing was validated by the folks over at NVIDIA when they bought or didn't buy Grok. That Grok, their new LPU is SRAM based.
Yeah.
So I think on the storage side, on the memory side as well, AI is impacting everything. It's making it, it's breaking it, and it's making us talk about it more, which, at that initial trifecta is you wouldn't have thought of a few years ago.
So to segue off of that, if you want to know more about Grok, SRAM, all that fun, DCD recently published an AI hardware supplement where I spoke to Ian Buck, who is, after Jensen, he's the big guy at NVIDIA. He's the big nerd behind the scenes. He invented CUDA. Like he's I chat to him every year, have a lot of fun. We chat about why they bought or didn't buy, sort of bought Grok, and also their kind of CPU resurgence. And then upcoming, Ben and I are traveling to AMD's big event in San Francisco later this month. Maybe to talk about that storage acquisition, because I think it's very clear. They bought ZT Systems. They're trying to catch up with NVIDIA, not just on the chip level, but on the systems level. NVIDIA has done a really good job shifting from just being the GPU guys to being the systems guys. There's a lot more money in it. There's a lot more lock-in in it. AMD's got a lot of ground to cover. Obviously, they got Pensando on the networking side, but they're not. No one's at NVIDIA scale.
Yeah. And you guys have also been to a couple of events in June. So, Ben, you mentioned the kind of Everpure. You went to the Pure Accelerate event in Vegas. How did you find that? Was it reflective of kind of what you've just mentioned and kind of how storage is shifting in the market at the moment?
Yeah, very much so. Their big thing was the introduction of the data intelligence platform, which sifts through that data and ties it all together. And I spoke to quite a few customers on the ground, and they're like, to go from FlashBlade, just selling flash storage, to this, it's night and day difference. And I spoke to them about their rebrand because that's a big thing as well. And they said that if they kept the storage name in, they worried about being pigeonholed, this whole data play. So you're seeing storage vendors move away from, whilst of course adhering to their original and long-term customers, but moving into this new and exciting moment of data management. Very much what we saw on the ground. And actually I dipped into HP Discover very briefly as well. And although they're not talking about storage so much there, that idea of data management, data importance to the underlying AI story, same sort of themes going on over that side as well.
Yeah. And Seb, you went over to Computex Taipei. How was that? What were people talking about? What did you see there?
It was a lot of fun. So myself and then Giacomo Lee from Ben's team went over. It's too far. We were both very tired. It's too warm and muggy, but the event is good. I say this as a company that has events. That was too large an event, right? Like it's 90,000 people, which is good from a vibrancy, but you always just feel like you're missing something, and you also have to wade through people. I ended up doing an interview with someone at the event over the phone because he couldn't get his way to me through all the people. You will be shocked to hear that the major theme was AI. I know, groundbreaking. But it's always fascinating with obviously Taiwan has this unique place in the world as this, the forefront of chip development, while at the same time having this big kind of sort of Damocles hanging over them. And you could see people starting to talk about it a little more honestly and openly, whereas before everyone kind of pretended it wasn't. They'll be like, "What are you talking about? Everything's fine." So that's something where we're going to have to keep an eye on, because if we're thinking supply chains are struggling now, like that's an end game on supply chains. To Ben's point on Marvell, so Jensen Huang had his own keynote, and then he was the surprise keynote guest, and like every other keynote, they'll be like, "We have a surprise guest," and he'd run out with a different leather. There were 2 keynotes going on at the same time. He went to both of them. But I was at the Marvell one. He came out and he was like, "This is the next $1 trillion company," and that alone caused its share price to surge. But this is networking's moment, which is good for Ben. This is Ben's moment. But yeah, networking is going to get bigger and bigger, more and more complex. It's much harder to write about. I'm lucky I can do company A is building a data center on this plot. It's just construction. Networking is, to Ben's point, just this horrifyingly interconnected conundrum and web, which is why we have him to do it. I can offload my brain to a smarter man.
I used to read AI model papers for fun with a glass of wine in the evening, to reading technical networking topology design contact detail, to reading complex networking topology design kind of structured papers. Oh my goodness, it's night and day in terms of technicality. But what I will say is I completely concur. And Jensen's crowning of something isn't without merit. Marvell are doing some really interesting things. Co-packaged optics will be the next big thing that we're going to be looking at in this space. So using light instead of electrical signals. That's only going to send what we can do with networks to the stratosphere. And I'm glad that that was front and center at Computex as well.
I find Jensen crowning is always funny. So one of my favorite moments was at a GTC a few years ago. I think this was just like right after the boom, and we're doing the Jensen press Q&A, and there's a South Korean journalist, and she just goes, "What do you think of Samsung?" That's all she asks. And he gives a very safe corporate answer, which is, NVIDIA works with Samsung a lot. We love working with them. We hope to work with them more. Lists a couple of things they work together on. None of it new. It was front page news in South Korea, and Samsung's shares went up a noticeable amount. So my business tip to people is buy some shares in a company, get Jensen to say he likes said company, profit.
I mean, I wonder at what point does working with NVIDIA not become a USP anymore? I asked a couple of vendors this at an event earlier this year. The answer's still yet to be defined, I guess.
Yeah, I was at OCP, I think it was last year, and NVIDIA were not there. Yeah, every single stand but one had a NVIDIA partner on it, and then it just, to your point, it doesn't become USB, it just becomes the way of being. Of course, you're an NVIDIA partner. Everyone's an NVIDIA partner. DCD, it's probably somewhere. I think we have them at our events. We can say we're an NVIDIA partner. Everyone's an NVIDIA partner.
Well, there you go. Just to wrap up, AI Week coming up on DCD on the 27th to the 31st of July. We're going to be talking AI all week. What's happening in the market? What are we seeing? 5 different days dedicated to different themes. But Seb, you're also releasing the AI Week supplement. What are we covering? Who's contributing?
Yeah, I hate it when you guys ask me this, because it reminds me I haven't written the stuff, because I have to write the stuff for it. And some of it is from Computex. I spoke to, there's a new agentic AI neocloud out there that wants to use Samba Nova hardware. So I spoke to them, did some stuff, talked to Intel. Charlotte, our computer storage networking editor, is chatting to some AI chip guys at the moment. As a journalist, one of the big struggles is, how do we tell this story anew? Honestly, the first year of the AI boom was easy. You just go, here's this convention that we're all used to. What does AI mean for it? AI for storage, AI for construction, AI. We can't, as journalists, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to just write, what does AI mean for X? So we have to go that level down. How has it actually changed this thing? How's the hardware changed? What does this hardware change realistically mean? I think one of the things that we sometimes do wrong is we get too excited by NVIDIA's latest rack is this many 100 kilowatts requires this. And that's not what most people are deploying. So it's really delving into what are the compounding lower tier effects, what is the main thing people are actually deploying, what does that mean for facility design. So I've still got a week or two to write it, I think, before we have to get it designed and legal and all that fun. But yeah, working on it. If you want to know what's in it, read it. That's the easiest way. It's free.
Yeah, brilliant. And Ben, any wrap up thoughts from you as well on, I guess what you think is to come on STX over the next kind of month or so?
Yeah, so for the month or so, we are just fully focused on building out our H2 mag, which is going live at our London event later this year. That'll be in print. If you're in person, grab a copy. That's our big focus right now. So we've got some really interesting articles. I'm doing a piece on, what it means to be a network engineer in the training sense, because 25% of engineers are supposedly retiring in 5 years. Can I put myself through their paces? Probably not. We've got some great pieces around, autonomous networks. Jack's doing a great piece on a certain convenience store chain in Southeast Asia. There's on their Pacific network backbone. There is a lot to come, and we're just focused on getting that and making it as beautiful and as interesting to read as possible. We got a lot of fantastic broadcasts going out, interviews, conversations. That's coming out throughout July. We're doing so much, and I'm excited for what's to come. But the most important thing is also for our North American readers is that they enjoy their Independence Day as well. That comes very early this month as well. By the time this goes out, it might have already happened, but we hope they enjoy the rest.
Yeah, there's that old saying about the Chinese proverb, the curse of may you live in interesting times. We live in interesting times. There's between now and AI week, there is going to be hundreds of news stories we're going to have to try and cover, and lots of fact checking we're going to have to do, and stuff we're going to have to debunk. And then after that, there's going to be more. It's just a constant wheel of news, which is why we hope that something like this helps, because as much as I'd love you to read all of the 700 stories plus all of Ben's stories, I know you ain't got time for all of that. So hopefully this gives you some of the highlights.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we'll have to wrap it up there. Hope everyone enjoyed watching this newscast as we look back on the month's news. As Seb mentioned, loads coming up over the next month, probably more news articles than you will have time to read, but read as many as you can. Tune into DCD's AI week on the 27th to the 31st of July. If you are on holiday that week, it will be available on demand. But I'll leave it there, but thank you so much.
Tune in on holiday.
Sorry?
Just watch on. They should tune in on holiday.
Or just watch it on your holiday,
right.
Indeed, if you have internet wherever it is you're going. Thank you, Ben and Seb, for joining me, and thanks to our audience for watching, and we'll see you on next month's news wrap-up. Thank you.